Hey, Dan Meyer here, and I'm back once again. Now I'm here with part two of Mastering Data Narratives, how to elevate your data dashboards with storytelling and annotation. So if you watch the first half, great. If you haven't, go back and watch the first half first. We're going to pick it up right about halfway through my talk to American University students, faculty, and staff about how to really not just crunch numbers and present them, but to share them in a way that drives massive impact. And we do that through storytelling, and storytelling is all about mastering the narratives. So, as I mentioned before, it's like a story, it's like a book or a novel, it's like a movie, it's like a TV series where you've got like an arc, a story arc. So, think about that in the back of your mind as you start working on your data visualizations and your dashboards and the reports that you do. So, here's part two. What are annotated visualizations? So the difference between a widget and a visualization that's annotated, annotated visualizations usually have the text around them, right? So you're usually kind of like we saw with the one woman that doing the Power BI. It's a box with a lot of words in it, right? Annotations, right? Again, it's like annotating a story, you know. So when you're watching a movie or reading a book and you want to like get more context, sometimes they'll be annotated, you know, like there'll be little snippets of information that people need to know to really fully understand the narrative. So again, they could be charts, graphs, other types of visuals that help us highlight important insights. And these visualizations really are built to be able to reduce the cognitive load. One thing you can use them for really is to answer questions before they get asked. If you talk about your data enough and you present it enough, you get into a point where you're starting to know people are going to ask certain questions. You're gonna kind of imagine in your audience that hands are going to go up because you're giving them something that's pretty complex and it needs to be broken down for them to fully understand. That's again why it's important to understand your audience and thinking about, you know, are they experts in the data or are they new to the data? Or do they not really even care about the data itself? They just care about the outcomes of the data. Each level requires more and more annotation to be able to make sure they can understand the visuals that you share. And really, to me, I always think about it as a teacher in front of a room, right? Or a speaker in front of a group of people you're talking to. You want to make that eye contact with them. And if you see people like doing this, then you know you're on the right path. When you see a lot of people that are falling asleep, check on their phone, whatever, you know you're on the wrong path. And you want to kind of imagine you doing the same thing with the audience that's going to consume your data. So if you're just preparing a report and you're not actually going to see the eyes of anyone that's going to read the report, that's not necessarily a bad thing because you're just giving information, just sharing information, reporting. But if you're explaining it, if you're talking about the why and the how, what it is that you've done and what they need to know about, if there's pieces there that you want to help them understand, this is where you use annotations. So it enhances visual storytelling, but annotations in Tableau, right? So how to do annotations. We just kind of saw one before for Power BI, and we saw what we're doing with the pop-ups, but basically the same thing. Annotations draw attention to important values, outliers, trends directly on the chart, guiding users' eyes to insights that may be overlooked, right? So again, it's all about understanding your audience. And that's when you think about great movies and great novels. The author, the director, they understand the audience and they give them more what they want. And they give them something they walk away satisfied with. Your favorite movie is your favorite movie because it does something inside you. It gives some kind of amazing emotional feel. Same thing with a great book. When you want to talk about something you've watched or read and share it with people, that's what we're going for when it comes to using data narratives, is we're trying to figure out how we can get that same kind of feel from our audience because we've helped them see the importance of not just the data, but the story behind the data. So improving comprehension for non-experts is really where annotations make the most sense, making complex data more accessible. Really trying to explain the spikes, the dips, the patterns. That's where annotations come in handy. So again, I wish we had more time to go through everything. I'll watch more videos, but I want to kind of keep us on schedule. So Google it, go YouTube it. At the end of this, if you're trying to figure out how to do more annotations, somebody has already figured it out. Whatever app you're using, whatever kind of data you're working with, you're going to be able to find somebody to help you figure out how to annotate it. Again, ways you can use these trend lines, explaining why trends change drastically, outliers, event markers, comparable labels. So I'm going to tell with you a quick idea, or share with you a quick idea that I had that made all the difference in the world in my career. And it was an example of data storytelling with a data narrative. And for those of you that are familiar with geography, imagine Florida, right? So Florida is a state in the southeastern part of the United States. And I worked at the time, I was working for Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo is primarily a West Coast bank. Wells Fargo kind of expanded eastward. And back in 2008, in the financial crisis, there was a bank on the East Coast called Wachovia. And Wachovia went bankrupt. Bad investment in mortgages, like so many other banks back in the day. They were insolvent because they overexposed themselves. Wells Fargo bought Wachovia, and that gave us a great opportunity. The opportunity that Wells Fargo had was now to be able to offer its products and services in the state of Florida for the first time. Because before that merger with Wachovia, Wells Fargo didn't have branches in the state of Florida, and now they did. And so that made management super excited because, wow, okay, new customers, new opportunity, new market, we can make a lot of money. We can, and that's what banks are all about, right? So I was a senior analyst working in the marketing team for our credit and transactional products, one of them being money transfer service, the ability to send money for immigrants to their loved ones back home. And it's like Western Union, basically. Wells Fargo has its own version called ExpressSend. Bottom line is Florida's got a lot of immigrants, right? Florida's an immigrant heavy population with a lot of people that send money home to their loved ones. To make the story short, where I brought in the ability to do data narration is that the powers that be decided they want to do a launch. They wanted to launch the ExpressSend service at a branch in Miami, the biggest city, the most diverse city in Florida. Makes sense. However, if you know the lay of the land in Florida, Miami, most of the immigrants that come from Miami come from a couple different countries. They come from Venezuela, they come from Puerto Rico, they come from Cuba. Not countries that Wells Fargo, well, Puerto Rico is not another country, it's part of the US, but anyway, not areas where you have to do a money transfer to. We can't do money transfers to Venezuela. We can't do money transfers to Cuba. We don't need to do a money transfer, like a remittance to Puerto Rico, because it's, dollar to dollar. So basically, Miami's not the best place to do it. I knew that. My data told me that. But I had to kind of explain that to the higher ups. And so, long story short, I had an opportunity to use a data story to explain to the CEO and members of the decision-making hierarchy at the time at Wells Fargo why we shouldn't launch in Florida, in Miami, but we should launch in Orlando, because Orlando had more people that had immigrated to the Orlando area from Mexico, from Central America, from areas that we were sending money to already. And so I created a map on Tableau. And the map was able to really kind of highlight the differences as far as like populations, country of origin, and then also being able to show opportunity, the amount of money that we'd make if we, launched the ExpressSend service in Orlando instead of Miami. And I was able to convince them that we should make the change. Instead of going to Miami, we should go to Orlando. Big success. I got a great bonus that year. It really kind of paved my way for the second half of my career at Wells Fargo. But what that means is I had to annotate that in a way that I could make it understandable to CEOs level, to C-suite level people. And the way to do that is to factor in two things. One, what do they care most about? Well, for better or worse, it's money, right? How much money will we make as a bank? And number two, how quickly can we do it? Was it something that's going to take a lot of time, or can we just make a quick shift? So I was able to, through this map in Tableau and using annotations, to show them, oh, if you go here, it's this much money. If you go here in Orlando, it's this much money. This much in Miami, Orlando, this much money. Boom, they made that quick decision. They were able to go, okay, yeah, we get it, Dan, great. Let's go ahead and make the switch. That's how a visualization can be annotated in a way. Think back to when the last time you had to help drive a point across with decision makers because you knew something in your data. Like I knew that Miami was a bad place to launch. And my research told me Orlando would be better, and I had the data to back it up. And so I was able to create a data story using a narrative about what they would get out of it if they followed my advice. When's the last time that happened to you? What was something that you've done where you had data telling you, do this, do this, do this? Decision makers were going to do something else, but you were able to influence their decision because you were able to share your data in a way that made them go, let's go with Dan's plan. That's when you want to be able to use data storytelling and create narratives. And that's an opportunity where you can put in special annotations and widgets and things that will give more value to your audience. So that's just an example I wanted to share. Cover our last topic real quick, how to actually create data narratives, right? So we talked about kind of like why we need them and kind of the nuts and bolts, watched a few videos, gave you a few resources. But basically, it gets back to data storytelling 101. A structured storytelling approach that combines data insights, visuals, and context to communicate a clear, compelling message. I love that word compel because that's why we're doing what we're doing. When our data tells us we need to do something besides just report it, we need to give it to decision makers so they can make the right decision. That's when our information has to go from educating to empowering. When we have to create compelling stories like you see in a movie or a novel. Using a step-by-step approach, a structured approach to find the main message, select the right visuals, and laying narrative elements is both an art and a science. And this is where data analytics science becomes art, data storytelling. Applying a visual hierarchy by sizing and placing the most important elements in proximity, by using color and bold text sparingly to draw attention. There's things that you can do to really build up that narrative. So the next time you make a pie chart, think about the colors, think about the complexity. How will this come across? There's simple, like if I had more time, we go through these, storytelling tips when it comes to data visualization that are super important that we so often overlook. For example, when you're telling something where you want to show a positive impact, the biggest slice of the pie should be green. When you want to show a potential negative impact, then the biggest slice of the pie should be red because we're hard-coded in our brains to think green is good and red is bad. So you can do things like this from basic data visualization tips, from visualization in general, how we learn, how we consume information, and apply them to creating the data narratives. The more white space, the better, the bigger, the bolder, the less text, the things that you can do to make it easier for that audience to consume the information is super important. When I went back to my Wells Fargo story, I mentioned the map because I could show them physically the difference between where Orlando was and where Miami was. And I was able to highlight the zip code level data using census data on country of origin. So the brightest colors around Orlando, where I wanted them to change their launch location to, I put in for people that were in a country of origin was Mexico or El Salvador or Guatemala. And I put them in greens, and then in Miami, I put them in darker colors, and I put them in for people that were from Cuba and Venezuela. And it showed a difference that was easy for them to grasp because I thought through a map is going to be the best way to do this. And colorations on the map based on filling things at zip code level is something that Tableau can do. So that's an example. When you want to be able to combine widget annotations for cohesive storytelling, you want to make sure that they're part of the flow, right? You don't want to overcomplicate it. You don't want to give people too much information. This is a problem a lot of us have, is we overcomplicate things. If I were to ask each of you to show me a dashboard you worked on, I'm sure some would be amazing. I'm sure a lot of you are really good at your dashboarding, but I also think some of you probably overcomplicate them. You put too much information. One of the biggest pieces of advice I ever got was from a book I read by a man named Stephen Few about the 4-quadrant dashboard and why our dashboard should have 4 data points with the upper left hand being your lead, right? The one that you start with, and then the next, the upper right being one that kind of like validates or adds to or gives more credence to the one on the left. And then you kind of go down the Z like our eyes do when we're reading something. And the lower left-hand side should again kind of like make sure that you're reinforcing the story of the first visual. And then the last one should be the big takeaway. What do you want people to do, right? So your most important visual should be your very first one and your very last one. And every visual in between on a dashboard should kind of support one of those two. So your introduction and your conclusion are the two most important chapters of a book, right? Setting the stage, introducing the primary characters, talking about the big conflict. That's your first visual. Your last visual is like, so what happens next? What do we do? What's the climax of the story? That's data narration. So using this ability to do things like that are really, really important. Some common pitfalls. We do a lot of overloading. I mentioned that before. We use complex jargon. Again, think about your audience. If you're used to working in an organization, if you work in a government organization, I'm sure you experience this, where everything's got an abbreviation. Does your audience know those abbreviations? Do they understand the mission of each of the organizations that you're part of? Do they need to know all that stuff, or is it too much? Do they just need to know that what you're working on is going to save lives, or make people have healthier, or do things that are going to have a positive impact, or make somebody more money for a good reason? That's what they care about. So cluttering with excessive annotations is a bad thing to do. You want to make sure you balance that detail with clarity. So I always think the least amount of white space, the better. I mean, the more white space, the better. The least amount of data that you're showing, the visuals you pick have to really be the right visual. There's times when you want to use a pie chart and times when you don't. And a lot of times, we'll figure that out through trial and error. A cool thing about Tableau and Power BI is they both tell you which ones you should use, right? They give you that prompt saying like, this would be good for a pie chart. Not always right, but generally right. So the thing is, test your dashboards, right? Ask for feedback. So one of the most successful aspects, or one of the reasons why I was successful as Fargo, was I had a best friend in the cubicle next to me that I could show my presentations to. And he'd say, yes, no, good, bad. And having that second pair of eyes is super important because we get lost in our own data. We know it really well. We live it. And so when we're trying to share it, sometimes we forget how complex it is and we make it too complicated for our audience. One of the things that my boss told me back at Wells Fargo when I first started that stuck with me is that he's like, Dan, you're really good at using Excel and you can find all this great insight and stuff, but you tend to overload me. I don't have time to look at all the data or read all your report. I got time for 3 bullet points. I need you to summarize whatever it is that you're working on into 3 bullet points that I can understand in a minute so I can move on to whatever else I got to do that day. This is a senior vice president at Wells Fargo, right? A very busy man. And he told me, keep it simple. 3 bullet points. Takes me a minute to understand. That's all I got. So I had to constantly think about how do I give him that? So the key decision makers that you're preparing your data for, that you're crafting these narratives for, you want to make sure you give them the 3 visuals, the 3 pieces of information that they need to go and make that decision. So get feedback, trial and error, look for experts. You can do a lot of things to get better at this. You're never going to be perfect. You're always going to be looking to improve, especially because we keep getting more and more technology. I haven't even touched on how we can use AI for visualizations. We're still scratching the surface there, right? So if you ask ChatGPT to give you a pie chart off of an Excel spreadsheet you'll upload into it, it'll give you some really interesting things you can do. And it's different than Excel. And again, there's all these other AI tools out there that we're starting to use. Power BI's got AI enabled into it. And there's just an endless thing coming at us every day that we can use. And so we're never going to be perfect. What we have to be perfect at is adapting. And so the ability to be able to use these technologies to do things like make data narratives using annotations and using different things like pop-up tools or different toolkits that we can embed, things that will help people understand things like I did with that map is what's going to make all the difference when it comes to you being able to be more effective at data narratives. So to summarize, define a clear message, identify the core insight of your story. Who is it that this is for? Who's your audience? Understand the message they want to take away. What do they need to know? And it comes from you, right? You're looking at the data and you know what they need to find out. So how do you get it to them? Well, you use contextual annotations of widgets, among other things, to be able to highlight key data points and provide the context, and you tailor that narrative for them. I think this is probably the biggest evolution we can make when it comes to being a data analyst to being a data storyteller, is really understanding how to define that clear message, pick the right visuals, and design for a specific audience. The last thing I want to share with you guys is my hero. Cole Nafik is actually a woman that I've gone to her trainings. I've spoken on stage with her at the same time. She is, without a doubt, from my opinion, the best storyteller on the planet when it comes to being able to understand the technical aspect, what we do. So if you do nothing else today, follow Cole, Storytelling with Data, and get to know her tips. It's all about simplicity. It's all about making sure that you don't overcomplicate stuff. And that's, I think, the most important lesson I can leave you with, is that your audience can only consume simple stuff, easy to understand. Occasionally, you're going to present data to people that don't need a lot of context, that don't need annotations and narration tips. They're going to get it because they know it like you do. But those are rare. Usually, you're trying to educate, empower, enable somebody that doesn't have the insight that you have. So Cole is a master at understanding the technical aspects of storytelling with data. So I would definitely check her out, Storytelling with Data. So the final thought, the growing importance of creating data narratives stems from the need to make data insights more accessible, understandable, and actionable. It's not going to get easier. It's going to get harder because we keep having more and more data. If you think about how much data we create every day, it's ridiculous, right? When we wake up in the morning, what's the first thing we do? We grab our phone, and we grab our phone. What do? We check our Facebook, we check our email, we check the news, check the weather, and everything we're doing is being tracked, and it's being used to be able to market to us, to figure out what we're doing. And AI is the one doing all this now, right? So simple things like, if you're having a conversation about, I'm thinking about taking a trip to Jamaica for spring break next year. I just mentioned that. My microphone's on. You know what's going to happen in about 3 minutes on my Facebook newsfeed? I'm going to get an ad telling me like, hey, do you want to book a vacation in Jamaica? That's where we're at with data. So it's not going to slow down. It's not going to get easier. What's going to be the difference maker for you is the ability to cut through all that noise and tell the story, to use data narratives to bridge the gap between the raw data and strategic action, empowering users to interpret complex information, uncover patterns, and make informed decisions with confidence. And by the way, full disclosure, that was written by ChatGPT. I like to do that occasionally to put ChatGPT into what I do. I ran my presentation to it before to kind of fix a few things, add a few things. I asked a few questions like, how do I say this better? I could have done this all by myself, but by using ChatGPT, it saved me time. And in some ways added things I would have overlooked. So I love technology. I love the fact that we live in this era where we have so much data and we're able to use it to do storytelling. I just think we're in the best of places right now, and it's only going to get more cool. But it's also going to get harder. So that is my talk for today. I want to do one last shout out, and that is about my own YouTube channel. I don't monetize this. This is purely for me to be able to share information for you guys. I have a bunch of different playlists, including one where I did a masterclass on analytics. So I drop new content on a regular basis. Dan Meyer, virtual staffing expert. So feel free to subscribe to that, no obligation. But I'm sure I probably recorded some things that will benefit you. And if you have any ideas, suggestions, find me on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. I'm connected with Bev. Feel free to ask me questions after the fact, or follow me or interact with me. But that's my talk. All right, there you go. So that was about an hour of me just talking about analytics, right? So part one and then part two, the two-part videos. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. If you have, thank you very much. I drop a lot of content, sometimes on virtual staffing, sometimes on data analytics. They're my two passions. And I kind of like have a 1A and a 1B of what I do. And so I'll be back again soon with more. Check out our masterclass, as I mentioned at the tail end of the video. There's a masterclass I put together, recorded, available to you on my YouTube channel for free. So sometimes I get paid to do this, but more often than not, I just like talking about numbers. It's my passion. Anyway, thank you for your time. Please do what you can to make the world a better place by using data, storytelling, and data narratives to get people to make better, more informed decisions. Anyway, that's it for today. Now get out there and do something cool.